wasting food on that kid again, Clara? He's not even a customer." The diner owner snapped, his voice sharp over the clatter of dishes. Clara Evans didn't flinch. She'd been secretly feeding a quiet boy every day, never asking for anything in return. She was a waitress in a small Ohio town, barely scraping by. One morning, 4 SUVs pulled up to her diner, and everything changed. Who were they? Why did they come for Clara? What's the most selfless thing you've done for someone in secret? Let's find out. Welcome to True Quiet Stories. Let's uncover what happened in this story. If you love these stories, you can support the channel by liking and subscribing. In a small Ohio town, the air smells of coffee and grease. Clara Evans lived there. She was 39 years old. She worked as a waitress at Daisy's Diner, a quaint spot on Main Street that buzzed with the hum of regulars. Clara's shifts were long. She poured coffee, flipped burgers, and wiped counters, her hands rough from years of service. She smiled at customers even when her feet ached, even when the tips were scarce, even when the weight of keeping her head above water felt too heavy to bear. Her auburn hair was always pinned up in a messy bun, her apron faded with grease stains, her eyes tired but gentle, a gentleness that came from a heart that had known struggle, that had known loss, that had known love, a heart that gave even when it had little to give, even when the town didn't give back, even when the days seemed to take more than they offered. Clara lived alone in a small apartment above the diner, a drafty space with a sagging couch, a flickering lamp, and a window that overlooked the quiet street, the distant train, whistle, a constant reminder of the things she couldn't fix, of the things she couldn't afford, of the things she couldn't change. Her husband, who'd once been her rock, had passed away 6 years ago, a car accident on a rainy night, leaving Clara to face the world alone, to keep the diner running alone, to hold on to their memories alone, even in the silence, even in the night, even in the years that had passed since he was gone. Clara kept going. She worked hard, but she had a kind heart. She gave kindness. It was all she could afford. Clara's life in Willow Grove, Ohio, was a daily grind against the odds and the past. The town had seen better days, its streets lined with faded signs, its factories shuttered after decades of decline, its people worn by years of hard work, years of dreams deferred, years of a life that seemed to take more than it gave. Willow Grove was a small community, just over 3,000 people, a place where everyone knew everyone, where Daisy's Diner had been a fixture for generations, a spot where locals sipped coffee, shared gossip, and found a moment of warmth, a place that Clara's mother had worked, that Clara had inherited after her passing, that Clara fought to keep alive, even when the odds were against her, even when the bills piled up, even when the town seemed to forget the diner, to forget her family, to forget her. She grew up in Willow Grove in a small house on Maple Avenue where her parents had raised her with love, with resilience, with the belief that hard work was the greatest gift you could give, that kindness was the greatest thing you could share. That hope was the greatest thing you could hold, even when the world was harsh, even when the nights were long, even when the struggles were heavy. Her father, George, had been a factory worker, his hands rough as he operated machines, his voice warm as he told stories at supper, his laughter a bright spot in their small home, a laughter that Clara still heard, even now, years after he was gone, years after the heart attack took him, years after the diner became her burden, her legacy, her life. Her mother, Ruth, had been a waitress, her smile a comfort to every customer, her hands quick as she served plates, her faith a steady anchor for their family, her prayers a nightly ritual that Clara still whispered, even now, years after she was gone, years after the cancer took her, years after the diner became her responsibility, her memory, her love. They didn't have much money, their meals simple but hearty, meatloaf on Sundays, soup on weekdays, a rare treat of pie when the budget allowed, but they had each other, and that made their small house a haven, a place where Clara always felt safe, always felt loved, always felt whole. Those memories were all Clara had left after her husband passed, a sudden loss that came on a rainy October night, his laughter silenced, his warmth gone, a void she couldn't fill. He'd been her high school sweetheart, her partner in every dream, her anchor through every storm. And his death in that car accident shattered the life they'd built, leaving Clara with nothing but the diner, the apartment, the silence that filled her days, her nights, her heart. She'd been 33 then, her hands still steady, her dreams still alive. But her world forever changed, her heart heavy with grief, with debt, with a life that seemed to demand more than she could give, more than she could bear, more than she could hold. She threw herself into her work, serving from dawn to dusk, her hands steady as she poured coffee, her back aching from standing all day, her heart heavy with the weight of loss, with the weight of responsibility, with the weight of a diner that was always struggling, a diner that hadn't turned a profit in years, a diner that reminded her of everything she'd lost, everything she couldn't afford, everything she couldn't fix, even in the silence, even in the night, even in the years that had kept her apart. But Clara had a kind heart, a heart that still beat with the lessons her parents taught her, with the love she'd shared with her husband, with the hope she held for a better day. A hope that lived on in the small acts of kindness she offered, even now, even here, even in the shadows where no one saw her, where no one cared, where no one knew. She worked with care, taking pride in the plates she served, making sure every order was right, every customer was cared for, every smile was genuine, a quiet gift to the people who filled her days, even if they never noticed, even if they never thanked her, even if they never saw the effort she put in, the love she poured into every meal, the heart she gave to every shift. Every morning, just as the first light crept through the diner's foggy windows, Clara would hear the faint jingle of the bell above the door. The air inside Daisy's diner was thick with the scent of coffee and grease, the kind of heavy warmth that clung to her apron as she poured refills for the early crowd. She adjusted her messy bun, her hands steady despite the ache in her wrists, her apron pocket empty of tips after a slow week. A week that had left her with barely enough to cover her own rent, a week that reminded her of the diner's struggles, a week that she couldn't escape, even in the silence, even in the dawn, even in the moments that passed her by. She glanced up, her eyes softening as she saw the same quiet boy slip into the corner booth, his head bowed, his clothes threadbare and too big for his small frame, his face pale with the kind of hunger Clara recognized, a hunger she understood, a hunger she felt, a hunger she couldn't ignore. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, didn't know the weight he carried, but she knew the look of a child who'd been left behind, the look of a child who needed a meal, who needed kindness, who needed hope, even if he didn't ask for it, even if he didn't expect it, even if he didn't believe he deserved it. Clara moved quickly, her steps quiet as she plated a hot meal. Scrambled eggs, toast, a side of bacon, her heart heavy as she slid it across the counter, even if she didn't know who he was, even if she didn't know why, even if she didn't know what would come of it. The boy's name was Tommy Carter, though Clara didn't know that at the time, didn't know the story behind those hollow eyes, didn't know the weight he carried, the weight of a loss that had taken everything, the weight of a life that had left him with nothing, the weight of a silence that had become his only companion, his only comfort, his only truth. Tommy was 12 years old, an orphan who'd been living in a makeshift shelter near the train tracks, a boy whose father had been a Marine, a man who'd served in the Gulf War, who'd flown missions over Kuwait in 1991, who'd seen things he couldn't unsee, who'd done things he couldn't undo, who'd lost things he couldn't reclaim. Tommy's father, Lieutenant Michael Carter, had been a hero once, a man who'd saved his squadron during a critical mission, ejecting from a burning jet to draw enemy fire away from his team, his own body scarred by the explosion, his own heart scarred by the screams of the men he couldn't save, by the faces of the friends he'd lost, by the guilt that had followed him home, that had followed him through the years, that had followed him to his grave 3 years ago, where he now rested on the edges of a town that had forgotten him, on the edges of a world that had moved on without him. on the edges of a life that had left his son with nothing but the clothes on his back, a faded photo in his pocket, the memories in his mind, the silence in his heart. Michael had lost everything after the war: his health, his peace, his family. The war a thief that had taken more than he could ever hope to reclaim. He'd come home to Willow Grove in 1993, a different man than the one who'd left, his body weakened by injuries, his smile gone, his heart heavier with the things he'd seen, the things he'd done, the things he couldn't undo. His wife, Tommy's mother, Sarah, had tried to help, her gentle hands a comfort, her soft voice a lifeline, her love a beacon in the darkness that had consumed him, that had changed him, that had broken him in ways she couldn't fix, in ways he couldn't share, in ways they couldn't survive. But the PTSD was too much, the flashbacks too real, the guilt too heavy, the pain too strong, a force that pulled him under, that pulled him away, that pulled him apart, until Sarah couldn't hold on anymore, until she passed away from a sudden illness in 2019, leaving Michael alone with Tommy, a son he loved but couldn't care for, a son who watched him fade, a son who was left alone when Michael succumbed to his injuries in 2022, knowing he couldn't be the father Tommy deserved, the man he'd once been, the man he'd never be again. Tommy had been fending for himself since then, a small shack. Near the train tracks, his only home, a tattered blanket, his only warmth, a cracked flashlight, his only light, a faded photo, his only possession, a photo that held the things that mattered most to him, the things that kept him going, the things that reminded him of the family he'd lost, even if he couldn't feel it anymore, even if he couldn't find it anymore, even if he couldn't live it anymore. The photo showed his parents on their wedding day, their smiles bright against a sunny backdrop. A moment of joy frozen in time, a moment Tommy held on to, a moment that broke his heart, that kept him alive, that kept him hoping, even if he didn't know why, even if he didn't know how, even if he didn't know what for. There was also a dog tag, his father's, tucked into his pocket, a relic he couldn't bear to look at, a relic that felt like a mockery of the pain he carried, of the family he'd lost, of the boy he'd once been, a boy he'd lost, a boy he'd never be again. Clara didn't stop at one meal that day, didn't hesitate, didn't let Tommy go hungry, even though the diner owner scolded her, even though her own funds were stretched thin, even though her own stomach growled. A risk. She understood, a risk she felt, a risk she couldn't ignore. For weeks, she kept feeding him, her hands steady as she plated meals, her resolve firm as she slipped them to his booth, even if she didn't know his story, even if she didn't know his pain, even if she didn't know what would come of it. Tommy ate in silence, his hands trembling as he held the fork, his eyes glistening with gratitude, his heart a little lighter, his hunger a little less, his loneliness a little softer, knowing someone cared, even if he didn't know why, even if he didn't expect it, even if he didn't believe he deserved it. For weeks, Clara continued her quiet ritual, a small act of kindness that became a lifeline, a silent promise between two souls who'd barely spoken, who'd never needed to, who understood each other in the way only the lonely can, in the way only those who have known hunger can, in the way only those who've been forgotten can. Each morning, Tommy would slip into the corner booth at Daisy's diner, his small frame barely filling the seat, his hands clutching the fork with a gentleness that spoke of gratitude, his plate of eggs and toast a gift he never asked for, a gift that held the warmth of Clara's kindness, a warmth that held the memory of a family he'd lost, a warmth that held the hope of a better day, even in the silence, even in the dawn, even in the years that had kept him apart. Clara never asked for anything in return, never told anyone, never let Tommy feel small for needing help, for needing a meal, for needing kindness, even if he didn't expect it, even if he didn't believe he deserved it, even if he didn't know her story, even if he didn't know her pain, even if he didn't know the weight she carried, the sacrifice she'd made, the life she lived in, the shadows, in the morning light, in the silence that had become her home. Tommy would eat quietly, his hand steady as he took each bite, his eyes glistening with gratitude, his heart a little lighter, his hunger a little less, his loneliness a little softer, knowing someone cared, even if he didn't know why, even if he didn't expect it, even if he didn't believe he deserved it. Clara's act of kindness went unnoticed by most, a silent gesture in a world that rarely stopped to see the quiet heroes, the ones who gave without asking for anything in return, the ones who loved without expecting love back, the ones who kept going even when the world didn't care, even when the world didn't see, even when the world didn't know. But one person did notice, a person who saw more than most, a person whose own life had been touched by the kind of quiet heroism Clara embodied, a person who knew the weight of a past unspoken, the power of a kindness unseen, the value of a child who carried a legacy he couldn't speak. His name was Sergeant Major Daniel Brooks, a regular at Daisy's Diner, a 45-year-old Marine stationed at a nearby recruiting office, a man who'd served in Iraq, who'd known heroes like Tommy's father, who'd seen the toll war took on, those who fought it, who'd lived with the same guilt, the same pain, the same silence that Tommy's father had carried, a silence Daniel recognized, a silence he understood, a silence he couldn't ignore. Daniel noticed Tommy one morning, his hands pausing as he sipped his coffee, his eyes catching the quiet boy in the corner booth, the way Clara slid a plate to him with a gentle smile, the way Tommy's eyes lit up with gratitude, the way the moment held a weight Daniel couldn't ignore, a weight that spoke of kindness, of love, of a child who might carry a story untold, even in the silence, even in the dawn, even in the years that had kept him apart. He approached Clara after Tommy left, his voice steady as he asked about the boy, about the meals, about the kindness she'd given, about the love she'd shared, even if she'd barely known him, even if she'd risked her job, even if she'd never expected anything in return, even in the silence, even in the morning light, even in the years that had kept her apart. Clara told him what little she knew, her voice trembling as she spoke, her words a bridge between the present and a past she didn't understand, between the silence and the sound, between the diner and a legacy, a bridge that brought Tommy's story to light, that brought Clara's kindness to light, that brought a hero's memory back, finally, after all these years, after all the silence, after all the dawn that had kept him apart. Daniel didn't stop there, couldn't stop there, wouldn't stop there, knowing Tommy's story deserved more, knowing Clara's kindness deserved more, knowing a hero's legacy deserved more, even in the silence, even in the morning light, even in the years that had kept him apart. He drove back to the recruiting office that afternoon, his heart heavy with the weight of what he'd learned, with the weight of what he knew he had to do, with the weight of a story that deserved to be told, a story that deserved to be heard, a story that deserved to be honored, even if no one else saw, even if no one else cared, even if the world kept moving on without them. He called his commanding officer, Colonel Rachel Hayes, a woman who'd served with Tommy's father, who'd known pilots like Michael Carter, who'd seen the toll war took on those who fought it, who'd lived with the same guilt, the same pain, the same silence that Michael had carried. A silence Rachel recognized, a silence she understood, a silence she couldn't ignore. Daniel told her everything, his voice steady as he spoke, his words a bridge between the past and the present, between the silence and the sound, between the diner and the sky, a bridge that brought Michael's story to life, that brought Clara's kindness to light, that brought a hero's son back, finally, after all these years, after all the silence, after all the dawn that had kept him apart. On a bright Tuesday morning, the sound of engines filled the air outside Daisy's Diner, a quai-tete rumble that shook the windows, that stopped Clara in her tracks, that made her heart pound with fear and curiosity, a sound that spoke of something big, something unexpected, a sound that would change everything, forever, for Clara, for Tommy, for the town of Willow Grove, for the world that would hear their story, that would see their love, that would remember, their kindness, their heroism, their humanity, in a way that would last, in a way that would matter, in a way that would echo, louder than words, louder than silence, louder than the dawn that had kept them apart. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to True Quiet Stories for more untold tales of valor. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.